here. I was just saying to Pam Reeve, I'm trying to get used to being in person, and as we all are. And it's strange. It's very strange, but it's also really, really great to see all of you in person and meeting new people. And we have a wonderful program for you this morning. And I just want to first welcome all of you on behalf of the board of the TCI to our 6th annual Town Hall Breakfast Conversation. And given everything that's going on around our world, literally, I'm sure there'll be no lack of questions and conversation today. There's quite a bit happening and impacting all of our lives professionally and personally. This is an opportunity for all of us to have a real conversation with this terrific group of leaders. So no question is off the table. This is your chance to really get real conversation and authentic conversation. So jump in, get up to the mics, ask any question you want of this group of leaders. I want to also make a big shout out, thank you to our sponsors for today's program. Eastern Bank Foundation, Liberty Mutual, and Morgan Memorial Goodwill Industries. And let's give a big hand to them. Thank you for all your support and continued support and engagement with us at TCI. See, I'm like not used to talking. This is like really hard. I'm so used to looking at myself in Zoom. It's like, oh my God, right? Okay, so those of you who know me know I will not avoid an opportunity to do an infomercial for TCI. But I'm going to keep this very brief because all the information is on your table. We have a lot of stuff coming up over this remainder of 2022. But there's one thing I want to make sure that you all get out your phone and put it on your calendar. September 14th, here over in the Seaport at PricewaterhouseCoopers, we will have our 25th anniversary celebration. And we want you all to be there. And during that celebration, we will be making a very big announcement about the future of TCI. So don't miss it. Please, September 14th, 5:30 to 7:30. So that's all I'm going to say today about my infomercial because everything else is on the table. So in any event, we do have a lot of programs, as I mentioned, on the table. And also, just so you all are aware of this, we actually printed the report this year for the impact study. So that it looks like this. There's some all over the room. And we will now do our 5th annual Women's Leadership Impact Study, and we'll be kicking that off in a couple of months. So hang on to your hat because it's be another interesting research project. So it is now my privilege and pleasure to introduce Liz Walker, who is our moderator. Again, thank you, God. Liz is just, as I think all of you know, she is just terrific, and she's a star in our book, and she will ensure that we have a lively, engaging conversation. So Liz, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Now, I don't know about you, but I have been nowhere but CVS in the grocery store for 2 years. So I'm really excited about being here this morning. You all look so beautiful, and it's so wonderful just to be with humanity again. So let's give a big hand just because we're here, okay? I have been participating in this town hall since the very beginning. So this is my 6th year of being here, and it is an amazing time and an amazing conversation, and it's different from other town halls because it is very interactive. That's all it's about. It's about you asking questions and you being in the conversation. So we have a very full morning for you. This morning, my devotion said that humankind can learn nothing except by moving from the known to the unknown. That's the only way we can learn. And I was thinking about that. For the last 2 years, we've been stumbling through the unknown. So the big thing, and does this sound like I'm starting a sermon? I know it does. I'm always on the verge, okay? But we are at this point now where we got to start really thinking about what we've learned. Have we learned anything? What has this 2-year kind of incredible time been for us, with isolation and uncertainty and misinformation and heroic actions and life-saving discoveries and distrust and change, and what have we learned? When we started this compelling and creative conversation, we realized we were entering an extraordinary era. We had no idea what that might mean. And today, that word, extraordinary, seems inadequate in describing these times we live in. Just when you think everything is calming down and you can exhale, something else happens. But here is the good news. Humanity has an amazing ability and an amazing capacity to adapt, to be resilient. We are learning to make our way. So today, we will talk with change brokers. We will talk with thought leaders. We will talk with innovators who are leading us through these incredible times. And I am honored to introduce to you our panel. I have to memorize the order. Do I have to do it in order? Because I don't have the order that we have here. So let me just do it from spirit, and then you guys know where you're sitting. How about that? You know what? You're on your own, okay? I'm going to do the best I can. But let me introduce these people, and not in any particular order, other than they are amazing people. So our panelists this morning include Dr. Marcela del Carmen Amaya. She is the president of Massachusetts General Physicians Organization, the largest of Harvard Medical School's faculty physician groups, and executive vice president, Mass General Brigham. In this role, Dr. Del Carmen leads over 3,200 MGPO physician members. She has also served as chief medical officer for the MGPO and for Massachusetts General Hospital. She is a professor of obstetrics, gynecology, and reproductive biology at Harvard Medical School, and holds a dual appointment in the Department of Surgery at the MGH. There is much more to say about her, much more to say about all our panelists. I'm just going to give you a little bit. Would you like to come up now, and then we can just start sitting, and you can give her a big... Jackie Jenkins Scott. Jackie is the president and founder of JJS Advising, a dynamic and accomplished executive, widely recognized as an innovative and transformational leader. She brings a proven track record of over 3 decades in leading mission-driven institutions from vulnerability to high-performing levels. In January of this year, Ms. Jenkins Scott was named interim president of Roxbury Community College. She is just enthusiastically welcomed into this academic community and already is changing the culture of that school for the better. In 2019, she was the interim executive director of the Boston Women's Fund, and we all know that she served from 2004 to 2016 as president of Wheelock College. Tracey Zhen. Tracey is president of Zipcar, the world's leading car-sharing network, where she oversees all facets of the business. Ms. Zhen is focused on innovation and leveraging technology to grow Zipcar's position as a category leader within the fast-growing mobility industry. She serves on many boards, including the Massachusetts Technology Leadership Council and Macy's. And in case you didn't know, Zipcar helps remove more than 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year. Tracey, welcome to this group. Lee Pelton is the CEO and president of the Boston Foundation, one of the nation's leading philanthropic organizations with $1.7 billion in assets. He joined the foundation in 2021 after serving as president of Emerson College and Willamette University. He is a well-respected thought and innovation leader, named as a living legend by the Boston Museum of African American History in 2021, and inducted by the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce into its Academy of Distinguished Bostonians in 2020. And last but certainly not least is Jane Steinmetz. Jane is the managing partner of the Boston office of EY. In this capacity, she manages approximately 2,400 professionals across all service lines who make an impact on area businesses and the community. As a managing partner and business leader, she's connected to top leadership within EY, allowing her to identify and bring the right sources to clients. She is engaged in the Boys and Girls Club, the United Way, the National Association of Corporate Directors New England chapter. So these are our panelists. We're going to start right away into the questions. Most of you already know the format for this town hall. It's created to just have the most engaging conversation. I'm going to ask each panelist this same opening question, which is just to let us all kind of get to know them. We then will ask you to come up. We have 2 microphones, and you can come up and ask questions from the floor. And we really want you to do that, so feel free to get up. And my role is just to keep the conversation going. And then we're going to leave a few minutes at the end of this morning so that we can ask another question to kind of close out the morning. But the main point of this is engagement between the panel and you. So I'll start with you, Jane, and this is for all of you. Considering the volatile times that we are living in, what are your greatest concerns, and what gives you the greatest optimism about the times we're in? And this question is for all of you.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks so much. And I love your opening when you were saying how we're all learning, right? And I've had great conversations with folks in the audience this morning. We can learn from each other. And so when I think about what I think is some of the benefits of where we are now and some of the concerns, we are still in this learning mode. When I think of the pandemic, the endemic, wherever we are right now, the way I describe it is the ground beneath us is still shifting. So when I think about the benefits, we've surprised ourselves in so many ways during this pandemic, trying to work through it. And I'm thinking just on the work side, not on the health side. So we've learned that we can work from home, and in some industries do just fine. I wish when I was raising my kids, I had that flexibility to work from home more rather than run to daycare and rush to pick them up and everything else. So I think that provides a lot of benefits to how men and women will work in the future, and how we can, maybe blend work and home more efficiently. So I think that's a benefit, but we're still trying to figure that out. On the same side of that equation, that can present some challenges that I'm worried about. Will it mean that someone like myself, back in the day when I had the 4 babies and I was like, what am I going to do? And work from home more and not have that mentorship, that sponsorship, those experiences that then propel your career. So are we, women, minorities, other groups, going to take a back step? And we can't let that happen. So that concerns me. So,
Tracey?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me this morning. What concerns me, I guess, top of mind right now is really the economy and what's happening with inflation. We've kind of lived through this big period of boom, even through the pandemic in some ways, and now we're sort of heading into this unknown of, are we going to head into a recession, are we not, the impact on businesses, but I think more importantly, the impact on individuals and families, and how the erosion of the living wage is going to be much more challenging, especially for lower to middle income families. And I think there's a lot of division unfortunately in our country right now, and I think the inequality that inflation can potentially impact these families it could be pretty powerful and troubling. I think that's kind of when I think about what's concerning. What gives me optimism is if you think about the level of innovation, like as a humankind that we've managed over the years, that's accelerated. But even in the pandemic, think about how quickly those vaccines were rolled out in phenomenal record time. I see more and more of that. I think even though through crisis, there's been innovation, there continues to be innovation, and I'm pretty optimistic that there'll be more, and hopefully that will benefit humankind in many ways.
First of all, I must say, I'm not, am I on? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I got to be so privileged to sit between incredible women here. Maybe they thought my name was Leigh rather than but, so I worry about everything. I really do. That's my job. But on the, at the macro level, I worry about our democracy. And I worry about it in particular because we are a divided nation on just about every significant issue that you can imagine. It's not the first time that we've undergone this kind of division. I mean, we think about the Civil War, for instance, when I think about 7 or 8% of Americans lost their lives in that Civil War. We think about the early and now currently the ongoing battle around women's reproductive rights, and that's coming to a head again. We saw this during the civil rights movement and so on and so forth. So it's not the first time. I think we've always been a nation in some way that's trying to figure out, what we are and what we stand for. But this seems to me like a particular acute moment. I laugh because I'm a living legend now, which is, I think it's better than the alternative. I'm not sure, but it certainly means that you're an old person. So I've seen a lot, is what I'm trying to say. So that's what I worry about at the larger level. In Boston, this is a highly unequal city. I love it, but it's a highly unequal city. There are those who are well off, and there are those who are struggling to make ends meet. And of course, the Fed report that we all quote these days from 2015, black citizens in Boston have a net worth of $8. When I say this, people say, that's a mistake, right? No, it's $8. And white residents in Boston have a net worth of almost $250,000. There's a deep divide there. That did not happen by accident, by the way. And trying to understand how it got us to the situation and how we're going to get out of it is part of what I'm doing at the Boston College. My optimism is the changing face of leadership. There's a view that changing the balance of power in terms of addressing societal issues, changing the balance of power rather than trying to change the minds of those who are in power is the way that you make those societal changes. And I can see here and elsewhere that the face of leadership is changing enormously. It looks very different today than it did in just about any sphere of our life 5 years ago.
Jackie, optimism and concern.
Thank you. Great conversation already. I can't wait to dig into this. Thank you for having me. I spent pretty much the last 2 decades, well, actually really all of my career in some ways connected to young people. And so that's, my concern is both sides of that coin. That the amount of hate in this society is so frightening. And I know you're right, Lee, it's been there all along. I was looking at Selma this weekend, Sunday with my kids again, and just both sides of that coin. I mean, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those 20-year-olds. I probably wouldn't be sitting on this stage if it wasn't for those 20-year-olds who really, and 17 and 18 and 16-year-olds who really were the force in so many ways behind the progress we've made in this nation. but every day, whether it's what happened in the school in the bathroom, and my concern is, where did we go wrong? Or did we go wrong? Our generation of adults. You would think with all the advancements we've made and so much privilege that so many have had, my kids, and I just wonder, did we go wrong? Should we be further along with acceptance and tolerance than we are? And I worry, and it's probably a small percentage of young people that are haters, but the haters really have a huge voice in the way our society works and what happens. So I worry about what we're doing, how we are raising our young kids. But on the other side, the flip side of that is these young people are amazing. They are incredible. And so you see that energy, you see how they have changed, how they've tackled climate issues. You see how even young kids, when any issue comes up, they're raising money for Ukraine, or so I'm ambivalent because I know they are our future, and I know that we have the capacity to be much better human beings than we are. And I believe it's got to come from our young people. And so my biggest worry is, what are we doing to give them what they need to be the kind of humans that we need for this universe to actually exist, not just the democracy, but the universe. Where are we going? So it's a flip side of the coin. Young people. I love them and I worry about them.
Sounds like a true mother.
So first of all, good morning, and thank you for having me. I think what I worry about the most is a little bit of each of the comments that we've heard this morning and how those intersect with healthcare. So I think, over the last 2 years, we have seen American medicine really rise and take on a pandemic that I never thought in the 25 years that I've been a physician I would see to live through. And we've seen the innovation that came around a virus that we had really no knowledge about at the beginning of the pandemic, to actually leveraging technology, very much technology that was born out of Boston in some ways, to really see vaccines develop and be in the arms of patients within a year of the pandemic. So when I think of that ability to innovate, it is really what's made American medicine so unique, and the contributions that American medicine has made to medicine globally. Against that is the growing cost of healthcare, which we've never seen be to where it is right now. We're close to 18% of the gross domestic product is going to go to healthcare, in a system of healthcare that's really broken, because against that cost are 13 million Americans that have no healthcare. So I think the pandemic has also underscored the disparities that exist in this country, and in my opinion, healthcare is a human right, and 13 million Americans don't have that right. So as I think to the future, I think our ability to continue to harness what has been the real asset of American medicine is contributions to innovation, to research, to drug development, to new technologies, new ways of treating patients, new discoveries that have led to really cures in many, many diseases, against the growing population that is really being left behind, is a concern that I think we all should have as a community, and is no longer tolerable. My other concern is the health and the well-being of our clinicians. We are sitting in unprecedented times with regards to burnout. 54% of American physicians are burned out, and many of them are leaving medicine. Against that is our charge to really educate the next generation of clinicians, nurses, physicians, medical assistants, advanced practice providers. And so how we do that in an environment that is really, really, really challenging, toxic in some ways, against the, things such as the reproductive health of women, In an ever-changing society with many, many challenges, as many of my colleagues have highlighted before, and how this all is intersecting in medicine and our ability to recognize these challenges and really move forward in a way that is more inclusive. The pandemic has not shown us anything new, it's just magnified the changes and the differences that were there. So I think for me as a physician today, I worry about how we're gonna provide care to all of our patients, how we're gonna harness things that we've learned from the pandemic, delivering care remotely, working from home, in an industry that is largely still needs people to come in person with a workforce that's exhausted and needing medicine. So there's a lot, I think, for us to think about, and my hope is actually the generation that's coming behind us. I think that they will ask questions and they will take firm positions that will be refreshing, and I think will teach us, how we could have done things differently. And it's embarrassing that we're leaving behind such a huge problem for them to figure out, but I think we'll learn from them in ways that are unimaginable to me right now.
Thank you. So I have more questions, but this is your time. If you want to get up now, you can come to the microphones and start your questions, please. And don't be shy. Everybody sees you now, you got to follow through.
You know how shy I am. I'm going to send you a question. So thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody at TCI, for this wonderful event. And I feel like all of you do. It's so amazing to be with all of you in person. So I had goosebumps while each one of you was talking and addressing just really important concerns from the lens that you experience the world through. So thank you for that. And so I could ask you like 10 questions too, but I promise I'll just ask one right now, which is, and I have to digress and just say, the last point that you were sharing on burnout just resonates so deeply. I do diversity and inclusion work, but every one of my clients is talking to me about, and how do we address burnout? Like, even if that's not what they're getting on a call to talk about. So I wanted to affirm that. But at any rate, what I am thinking about is the leadership pipeline. I mean, right, we are here to talk about leading through extraordinary times. And that's not just, and I know a little bit about Jane and the work she's done. Certainly gender always comes to the forefront, but we are talking about the leadership pipeline around so many identities now, and so many people who have been marginalized and hurt and are struggling in the ways that many of you alluded to. So anybody who wants to take this on, maybe a couple of you do, if you want to talk a little bit about what you think might be coming along for in the leadership pipeline, the challenges, how are we going to overcome some of those challenges? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Anybody want to take that?
Happy to start. I so appreciate that question because I strongly believe we have to make sure everyone's getting the right type of opportunities and challenges to position them to be that face of leadership, which I thought was so well said. So I feel strongly that sometimes it's grassroots. And if we want to keep employees, we have to have meaningful conversations with them about what their future is at your organization, at my organization. If they have hope and they see a future, they'll stay, but it's not enough. Then you have to map out the types of opportunities that they need in order to achieve those aspirations. And I feel it's that blocking and tackling, that grassroots, that's going to really create the funnel of leadership that we need. And unfortunately, I've seen in the past, and I'm talking like decades, that was given to those within a network. And so some very, very talented people might be a little introverted, might not raise their hand to have those conversations, may not feel included. And so it's that purposeful outreach to your employee base and having those conversations that I believe will then generate the right face of leadership that we need across all demographics, race, gender.
So I was recently looking through, McKinsey does a report, I think it's annual with leanin.org, about women in the workplace, and they publish like really interesting stats around the corporate pipeline, and you can see where women versus men kind of move along, the ratio of women to men along the corporate pipeline. And by the time you get to the C-suite, I think numbers, I'm just kind of quoting memory, is like 24% are women by the time you reach the C-suite, and 4% of the 24 are women of color. So, you know, you can see the drop-off, and where the drop-off happens most is really the first step out of entry level to manager. So I think, you know, as leaders, we need to be very intentional, to Jane's point around coaching and giving the opportunity and recognizing talent and giving confidence that what that means is giving them stretch roles that they may not be ready for or not feel confident that they're ready for, and just being very, very intentional about career development and being proactive. And I think part of that is coaching managers to do the same, right? And, you know, telling them, you know, we would recognize the talent, you know, we're having these development conversations on a regular basis on what do they need, how can we support them. And I think even more so these days, it's also just with the pandemic, I think myself as a leader, it's also thinking about how do you balance not just what you need through the organization, but recognizing the mental health toll on women that have families or mothers, and that's been, I think we're still figuring that out, but I think that's been very, very challenging. But I think that's where, like, we have to be very, very intentional. I think it starts earlier in the pipeline. By the time you get a C-suite, you know, the odds, unfortunately, are stacked against you as a woman.
Any other thoughts, Jean?
You know, I'm sitting here thinking about leadership, and one of the things I think is that all of us have an opportunity to role model what good leadership is. And there are leaders at all levels in our society and in our organizations. And very often, we do not set the example of how you lead with integrity, how you lead with courage, with passion, with recognizing the skills that it takes to move and change an organization, change a culture of an organization. And very often, I think we talk only about the technical, I would call it the technical aspects of grooming a person to be a leader. And that's very, very important. I'm not criticizing that at all. We have to have both. But I think that we have not seen enough courageous leadership, and we have not seen how we can recognize leadership potential. And I think some of the work that we're now, I was talking earlier, Lee, with someone about re-envisioning philanthropy. And to re-envision philanthropy, it's going to take very courageous leadership to open it up. So when we talk about these issues of equity and so on, I think core values drive what kind of leaders we have, what kind of society we have. And I want to encourage us all to think about ourselves as leaders and how we use our talents and our own leadership opportunities to show and demonstrate what it takes to be, to have a company that allows women to excel, what it takes to have an organization that recognizes that diversity is more than just skin color or more than just experiences where people come from. That has to come from someplace in order to seep down. And that's what we haven't had enough of, in my humble opinion. So I like to say we are all leaders, and we all have the opportunity to demonstrate what leadership means. And I'm convinced that we can tackle and change anything in our society if we want to, but we really do not have the integrity, the courage, the will to tackle some of the very hard issues. What's going through my mind is John Legend and Carmen's Glory, when they talk about it takes the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the young. That wisdom does not seep through. We don't see enough of it, and it comes from all parts. So I'm all for all the technical things that we are talking about. I wish as a society, when we talk about these issues, we can really go deeper into what it really means. What are our core values? How do we show them? How do we have the courage? So that's, I'm rambling, but that's just what I wanted to kind of throw out there in this leadership conversation, because we very often quickly go to the technical sides of it.
The only other comment that I would make is that we have to hold ourselves accountable. I think that, you know, when we measure how far behind we are with regards to pipeline, you know, through whatever lens you look at it. But I think beyond measuring it, we have to hold ourselves accountable as to how we're going to make that number better, and hold leadership at the highest of levels accountable to make a really meaningful change. You know, I think in medicine, you know, we know that the demographics of this country are changing, and that we are going to care for a very different population of patients in the next decade. And we are not ready, we're not prepared. You know, when you look at Harvard Medical School, we have a faculty of 13,000 physicians across Harvard Medical School, and less than 3% of those faculty are faculty of color. Less than 1% are professors. You know what I mean? And so we have a great pipeline. About half, if not more than half, the women coming into Harvard Medical School are women, but we're not creating opportunities to actually develop those careers. So we need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to have aspirational metrics that we are going to fulfill over the course of a specific timeline. And we also have to be mentors and sponsors, right? I mean, it's not, at least in medicine, it's not just about mentoring somebody. Is really about bringing that person through until you've successfully put them where you want to put them. And so I think that all of us have, I think, a lesson to learn about accountability over how we move the agenda forward.
Any other questions coming up from out there? Please feel free. One of the things I wanted to ask you all about, or someone, is the issue of trust. We're in a climate, nobody trusts anybody. You don't trust your institutions, your health institutions, you don't trust schools, you don't, at least it seems that way to me. Is it that bad? What do leaders need to do to gain that trustworthiness? And I'm sorry, I asked you to stand, then I have a question goes on for an hour and a half. I haven't been out much, what can I tell you? Anybody want to tackle that one about trust in your field? Is it an issue that you're at all concerned about, or am I over?
You know, I think Jackie said it well. Because I was just having this conversation the other day. I said, you know, I think what we need to do is take some of the more senior partners and deploy them over here, and what they're working on, give it, you know, down to the more junior folks, and like, let's just shake it up a bit. Someone said, they're not going to trust. They're not going to trust that if you just say, hey, do something new, lose your book of business, they're not going to trust that they're going to be okay. And I remember having this conversation. I'm like, well, we've got to change that equation, you know. And I do think it's leading by example. And you know, I always say when things go great, everyone's just getting along just fine. When things go bad, that is when you really build that trust. Did you get somebody's back? Did you not point the finger? You know. So, but I do agree. There's a trust issue that is apparent, and I think, well said. I mean, as leaders, we need to exemplify our morals, our behaviors, and I think that in turn can build some trust in the system. It's intangible, you know.
The one thing I'll add to that is, I think building trust, it's a lot of, for me at least, it's about transparency as a leader. So being very open when things are going bad, when things are going great, and just being able to explain, you know, why we're doing all the things we're doing, why these initiatives are in place, and, you know, making sure that employees understand your decision making. I think that helped. I mean, that was basically what we did throughout the pandemic, which was being very brutally honest with ourselves and our employees on what's going on. I think that builds a certain degree of trust that helps.
Please.
Good morning. I'm just so appreciative to have this time and space to have this kind of conversation, so thank you. This is just, it's a great way to start the morning. I'm Leslie Suggs, President and CEO of the Home for Little Wanderers, and I want to piggyback on Lee and Jackie, your comments about young people and the hope of the future. I too believe that, you know, the hope for the future is in young people. I see the resiliency of kids every single day who have experienced really challenging circumstances. Yet we also know that that our kids are not okay, right? That's the headline. They're not. And that the mental health crisis that we've seen our young people experience during the pandemic was there before the pandemic. It was sort of just the breaking point for kids. The impact of everything that they hold. You know, I look at the stats, which I think are staggering, about the impact of the pandemic on young girls. And the impact on their self-esteem. You've seen their self-esteem drop in very significant ways. We've seen the Surgeon General's report around the crisis for kids and mental health across every demographic. And so my question is, I also hold that hope because I see the amazing resilience in kids and their determination, and I also see the great pain. I don't know if folks saw the piece that 60 Minutes did on Sunday, really highlighting the crisis for kids. And so my question is, I think it's a holistic approach that we're going to have to take. I mean, we really have to sort of, Liz and I were talking right before our talk this morning, and I do worry that there's a sentiment that somehow this is just a blip, that things are going to settle down and we're going to be okay. And I don't think that's true. I think that there has to be a holistic approach to how we think about the social well-being of young people so that they can take on those incredible challenges. And just as a side note, not to get on my soapbox, but I also think about, to your point, Jackie, about this level of hate that's out there, the impact of social media and how much kids digest. I mean, I think my personal opinion is there's a direct correlation between the self-esteem in young girls and how much they've been on their phones and digesting social media over the last 2 years and the messages they get. I'm constantly trying to unpack that with my own children. My question is, as leaders of influence in our community, what do you see? What is your sense of how we approach this as a community? Because it's not just the mental health professional that I employ at the Home for Little Wanderers. It is not just the healthcare profession. I think it's a holistic approach that we have to take to think about how we shore up this environment for children so that they can thrive and succeed, so that we can develop those leaders in our organizations.
Well, thank you. So James Baldwin once said that, or wrote actually, that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so what he meant by that is that you have to tell the truth, and you have to understand the truth, and you have to look it square in the face. So I think that part of what you're talking about requires a kind of diagnosis and a deeper understanding of what drives this fear, anxiety, and trust among young people. There are obviously enormous generational gaps between young people today and the generation that preceded them. They grew up in a very different world. So I think that, I don't think there's a monolithic way of thinking about this, because I think it has to be specific to certain communities and certain aspects of what it means to be human. But I think it all begins with a clear understanding of what the issues are in those circumstances. And I think that change in any aspect of our human endeavor, in our own personal lives or in business, is a three-legged stool. And all three legs of that stool must be upright in order to succeed. The first is, as you just mentioned, is leadership, obviously. The second is resources. And the third is a strategy or a plan. You remove either one of those when you're trying to solve a problem or address an issue, then that stool won't. So we have to be, I think, first of all, we have to have a kind of surgical precision when we think about this, because what you just described is a large issue, but I think it's different in different communities and in different different settings. I guess to the larger question, do leaders have a responsibility in this regard? I think absolutely we do. I think you used the word crisis, and the Greek etymology of crisis is change. That's what crisis is. And so this is not only a crisis, this is an enormous opportunity for us in this room and for the nation and for government leaders and business leaders and people like me who have another kind of day job. This is an opportunity for us to, first of all, to diagnose the issue and to set about developing a variety of solutions to address mental health. It is rampant. Colleges and universities will tell you that they're spending more and more of their resources on mental health, and not enough, really not enough. And there are a group of us, I'm still a part of this group of college and universities nationwide who've come together to try to look at this issue from our perspective and how we might bring about change. And so we've been doing that for last 3, 4, 5 years through the Christie Foundation. I don't know if you know the Christie Foundation, but they do great work.
I would only add to Lee's excellent comments. Truth-telling is the start of everything, and until we can face the truth. And I think, I started my career working in Roxbury at the Dimmick Community Health Center during, both the drug epidemic, drug crisis, and the AIDS crisis. And of course, when things were in certain communities, it was those communities, because it was those people. And it was because something was inherently wrong with them. And until we saw the drug issue going to the suburbs, then the face of the conversation began to change. So I think, we have to face that this issue of what kind of children are we raising crosses all communities, all economic communities, all racial communities. And one of the hopeful things I have or feel is that when we understand that this impacts all of our children, not just children in low-income communities, not just children, it affects kids at Harvard and the kids at Roxbury Community College. So when we understand that, we can, as a society, begin to say, what are the strategies we need? How do we work with our young parents? How do we work with that 16-year-old who's just having a baby and living in very challenging circumstances? And some of the same issues are impacting that young woman out in Weston who has, on the surface, everything she needs to be a great mother. And yet we're raising some kids in Weston. I'm not picking on Weston. You all know what I mean. So that truth-telling, I think, is the very first step. And I'm confident that if we begin to think about these things and tackle them, we can actually do something about it. It's not just resources. Resources are going to be critical, but it is really a mindset that we have to have as a society.
Can I say something about social media, because you brought that up? And you know, I think we all understand now that social media destabilizes the truth. It decenters the truth, and that's a big issue. I think the other problem with social media is it provides little to no context, because a lot of what happens in our lives and the way we make judgments about certain events or people or what someone said is the context. And social media is without context. And so what you end up with is a situation where people or a group of people are in an environment where truth is destabilized and where there's very little context to this issue or that issue. And so you end up with people shouting at each other. I mean, metaphorically, and sometimes,
Really?
you know, really. And so, and that's a problem. That's a huge problem. Probably not only here in this nation, but worldwide. I don't know how to solve that problem or resolve it. I have no idea. But that's what I see. And it's at all levels of life, not just our personal lives, but you know, think about our various governments, you know, municipalities and at the national level, and we've got, you know, it's become a tool, an instrument for bludgeoning someone at the national level with a congressman or you know, and that's the problem with social media. And I don't know, it destabilizes the truth, it decenters context, and I don't know how to resolve that.
Did you want to come up to the mic? Please.
Right, Pam? Yes, sir. Pam told us we have to all come up and ask questions. And Tracey. You know, I was at MIT Solve last week talking about social issues, and one of the answers that a brilliant person talked about, the cure for this social media thing is it's all talk, it's all broadcast. And that's true of media. So they said, where's our dialogue? And that got me thinking. So the question to you all is this. Is there spaces that you're involved in where there is meaningful dialogue, even with people with differing opinions who are constructively working towards solutions, and with a bias to action, not just talk? And if they exist, tell me about them. How do we join? How do we replicate? Or if they don't exist, who wants to start it now? Because this is a town hall. This is not a sit and talk about it. What can we go do? Because that's, if you look at the roots of our city, right? The abolitionists and all the women's rights groups, they were biased to action and writing and protesting 200 years ago. And it felt so inevitable. 15 and a half years ago when Barack Obama got elected, we just felt like everything was going to go right. And boy, were we proven wrong. If we don't do something, we're screwed. So what do we do? So who can name a place, especially you, Lee, that you're at, the dialogue is happening, and what can we do to help?
It's called the Boston Foundation. That's what we do. You know, in fact, I would say that our main function at the Boston Foundation is civic leadership, not giving out money. And so we have dialogues practically every week. And you could go to the website and see these on a variety of issues. An issue that I've lifted up because I think it requires some discussion is around reparations. It's a really, very controversial. People get react strongly to it. But we've had 2 conversations around reparations. We're going to have a third. And it provides people of goodwill and good conscience and good sense to discuss something like that in that kind of setting. And we do it in a very structured way. And I could go on and on and on, but that was just, that's a recent example. So that's what we do, and it's tbf.org, easy to find, and anybody's happy to participate in these dialogues. We live in this 2-dimensional Zoom world. It has disadvantages, but one advantage is that we're not burdened by place, and so I think the last reparations discussion we had, 500 people signed up for it, which is not something that we would have been able to do if we were meeting face to face. So there's a whole series of those, and I would encourage you to participate if you have an interest.
I think that the words that you used were meaningful dialogue of people with different opinions. I think we see a lot of action with people of the similar opinions. What I think as a society, we are in this divided society. How, and I don't know the answer to this, but I don't know how we have what you asked for, meaningful dialogues with people of different opinions, particularly when they are at both ends of the spectrum. Can always be there tends to be, I think, more dialogue of people who are either kind of in the middle or want to learn more, who are open to learning more, but we're so divided, and like I don't look at a certain television station. I refuse to. So some people tell me, and some of my friends say, I look at them because I want to know what they're saying. I want to understand them, and I have great respect for that. So I think the challenge is those three or four words that you said. And I don't know how we get around that as a society, and particularly in certain parts of the country. I'm always amazed because, we live in this bubble in Boston. Go to Georgia, where my daughter lives. Go to some of these other places. There is no dialogue, or very little. So that's, I think, one of our biggest challenges as a society. And I have no idea how we overcome that. And I think it is, to your point earlier, Lee, about the democracy, I think if we don't figure out how we do something about that, we're really in trouble.
I wonder if we're not at a point now with this situation with Roe versus Wade, depending on what happens, but what we assume is going to happen, we're going to be forced, you got to get on the other side of that. So what happens after that? Somebody's going to have to talk to somebody, right? Or not. Do you know what I'm saying? When you get to a point where you're so divided, you would think that that would bring you an opportunity for someone to reach across the aisle. Now, maybe we've been there before and we never do it, but I wonder if this.
I'm pessimistic on that. I don't know how you bridge that.
That's what I preach about every time.
I know you. That's why we have to have Liz here.
I think that the one comment that I would add is that I think there's a very basic principle here, and I'm going to reflect on my experience as a doctor. In my line of work, I have to be present for every patient that I see. I'm an oncologist and I'm a surgeon, and so I think that I remember going back to my first week of medical school, and one of the deans said, your biggest responsibility is to listen to the patient. Irrespective of what the lab studies or the imaging studies show, you have to listen to the patient, because the patient will tell you something in that conversation that will help you guide course of care and really be there for them. And that requires really listening and removing yourself from any subjective opinion that you may have about a certain position. Because if you don't do that, you can't really listen well enough to actually understand the perspective of the other person. And it's more uncomfortable when that perspective is maybe against your own position. But I think we owe that to one another as a society, and you have to be present. And I think that much of what we're seeing in this generation that's behind us is about our not being present for them and not really listening to their concerns and their issues. And I think that as we move forward over the next several months in this country, which will be very, very challenging, we have to be tolerant of a perspective that may be different from ours, and we have to be able to listen. I'm from Nicaragua, and so for me as an immigrant in this country, it's really tragic, beyond belief. I left my country when I was then in the middle of a civil war. My dad, who just turned 85, said to me the other day, I will die and will have never seen a democracy in my country, in Nicaragua. So when I think of the United States, you have had a country where there has been a democratic system in place, and I think what you're at risk of losing is essentially rule of law. And so I'd encourage all of us to really come together as a community, to really be present and to be tolerant of a position that may not be ours, so that we can come together to a solution that will feel comfortable. Maybe not perfect, we're gonna have to make some trade-offs, but I think it begins with a real, honest, and transparent conversation.
Absolutely. I didn't know that you guys, are you standing up to?
Yeah, I was over there, but I think that's a bad place.
Okay. So we have 4 people, and go right ahead. You're the first at the mic. My apologies, I didn't see you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for your
Can you move that mic so that we can?
I'm not that short. Thank you so much for your comments. I wanted to raise the issue of culture. I don't think that we talk about culture enough, because one of the things that I don't like is I don't like to be called a minority, and I don't like to be called a person of color if I consider myself Black. So that's just my personal peeve. So when I hear those words, I don't like it. But how are you going to know that I don't like it?
We don't hear you.
If you don't talk to me about my culture, and I don't talk to you about your culture. So culture is very important. And in working with youth, culture is majorly important, because youth, they're about culture. You know, we have youth who are into hip hop, but they're different races. But that part of their culture is the same. So we all have culture, but we don't talk about it, and we don't raise it, and we're afraid to say the words. And if we don't have the words, how are we going to make change in our society? So my question to you is, how are you incorporating culture in the work that you do? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, you know, we have a pretty diverse workforce, which we celebrate. And one of the ways that we embed culture into our organization is really using some of the events throughout the year. Like, for example, this month is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, AAPI, and I think we're going to do the same thing this month as we did last year, which is we have people of, like, I'm Chinese. I identify with your point around, you know, you're Black, I'm Chinese, but we refer to Asians, right, as a community, and it's very different within, like, there's many types of Asian ethnicities within the word Asian. So one of the things we've done last year was really we had people from that are Japanese, that are Filipino, that are Hawaiian, and come and talk about their family traditions and just do a little bit of a show and tell. And we made it really fun. And this is enabled through Zoom, right? They would kind of show family photos or the food they cook or whatever it was. And one way of just connecting the personal side of who our employees are to the rest of the organization, but also celebrating the culture of Asian Americans. So I think, you know, and we try to do that throughout the year with different events. But I think one of it is just bringing more personal side of our employees to the workplace. So that's one.
I'm going to let the next lady speak just because we're running out of time, and I don't want to not get you guys up. Please.
Great, thank you. So this is my first time coming to one of these events, so thank you. And I have what might be a little bit of a selfish question now that I have 5 people up here who are leading Boston organizations that have a lot of influence. So I am the CEO of a marketing and advertising agency that works exclusively with purpose-driven organizations, so healthcare, public health, arts and culture. And I've been the CEO for just a little while, but was really in this leadership position for the past 2 years. Really, this happened right when the pandemic started. And all of our workforce I have 30 people, and they've gone through this really difficult time, obviously, over the past 2 years. Everyone's had very personal issues that have happened. And so my question is, I want to extend grace to those workers. I want to hopefully extend some to myself. I also have 2 little kids. But at the same time, we're working with sectors that are really deep in the pandemic work, healthcare. We do a ton of work with the Department of Public Health, with transportation and arts and culture, and these organizations that, if anything, need our service more now than ever. Clients are more demanding because the demand is on them. And so my question is, as the 5 leaders up here, do you kind of just shoulder that responsibility yourself so that you can extend the grace to the people below you? Or how are you kind of working through that? Because I haven't found that kind of release valve of just extending it to everyone, because the demand is there for a lot of what you all do and a lot of what I'm doing.
Anybody want to take that one?
I'm happy to start. So professional services firm too, and we always say we're client-centric. So if the client needs us on site, if they do defense, manufacturing, they got to be on site. Cyber, right? You're going to make sure you're on site. Healthcare, certain things. So it's really trying to meet your employee where they are, but asking, that's what we do. We need people on site. Tell me how you feel about that, and trying to open up that dialogue. With a 30-person staff, I think that's hard because people may be one way or the other, and you may have more demands than willingness to fill. But we typically ask, we open up that dialogue, and we try to position people into jobs that assimilate with their preferences. But I know from a large organization that is hard, but that's how we've tried to accomplish it, through that open dialogue.
I'm going to keep it going just because we have these other people. Thank you, and maybe have one person answer each question.
Good morning, thank you so much. It's Weston, my parents are from Chicago. The Boston equivalent is my mother's from Weston and my dad's from Dorchester. And somehow I made it. It's and it also kind of goes into 2 questions. One is mental health. How can we stop talking about mental health when it's in some cases a physical situation? My grandfather committed suicide, my uncle committed suicide, my dad had electroshock treatment, my sister's been in jail for arson. I have lived with mental situations in a family, and for the non-mental person, maybe, I don't know if that's true or not for me, but how can we make space for that? The other thing I think that also came up in the pandemic was how many people live alone in the isolation. And one thing that I don't hear from businesses or society is space for the unmarried, the single person. We're the loser. We're let's set you up, as if that's the solution. I'd like to see if we can have a conversation, maybe in a town hall situation, for this space. I mean, I'd love to meet somebody. It just hasn't happened. I hope that my life doesn't matter. And I would like to feel like, how can we make space for people like that? Thank you.
Totally agree.
Anybody want? I think we all have to look at that, because it affects all of us. And some of us are willing to say it out loud, as you were very courageous to say, and the others are just hiding it. But we are all losing it right now as we speak. I'm telling you. Just face it. I mean, you may have not as bad as the next person, but we're all affected by what's going on. How could you not be? So thank you.
Yeah, I think that was an excellent point, particularly about single living at home. You know, that group was probably impacted tremendously when we were all shut down. And I think it's a great idea to have a format like my company and say we're going to have a conversation and open up a listening session on that. I think it's a great idea.
The only thing, other thing I would just quickly add is somehow as a society, we have to get away from this deficit model thinking. You know, my whole time at Demi Community Health Center, we wanted to move away from the deficit way of thinking. How do we frame things from a more healthy point of view? So, you know, there's nothing wrong with being single and living, but somehow as a society, we've made it as a deficit. Something's wrong with you, something's wrong with certain communities, it's their fault. No, it's life. And so I really appreciate what you said, and I think the challenge for all of us is how do we flip these things that, you know, come from a perspective of either individual fault, communities are certain fault, you know, and move to a more problem-solving, positive way of thinking about ourselves and our communities.
Please.
This is my first event as well, so this is very inspiring. But I guess my question is, it's more like advice I'm looking for, especially with all you being in leadership roles. I guess my question is, you've all had a journey, I'm sure, to get to where you're at. So my question is, during that journey, I'm sure there's been plenty of challenges. There's been moments of discouragement, feeling stagnant, feeling like, you know, maybe I'm in the wrong field. My question is, have you ever felt that way? And also, how do you overcome that?
Yes, I think everybody on this panel can say yes, we felt that way at one time in our...
Who wants to take that?
Well, yeah, I think we've all felt that way, and so I'm glad you asked the question because I want you to know that that's the journey you described is nearly universal, and so you would not. Maybe that's coming out of some experience that you've had recently. I'm not sure, but if it is, just know that you're not alone. You know, I think for me. I was very clear-headed about what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be a college president, and I thought I'd be a college president when I was 40. Missed it by 6 years. But I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and that was based on a set of a kind of self-examination of what was most important to me. Yeah, so I'll just leave it. I mean, I studied English and American literature. When I told my father I was going off to study poetry at Harvard, he thought I was crazy, and that I was going to be in Boston, which was not. But I was very clear that I've always been guided, and I hope you are, and I think everybody in this room should be, by a set of principles, guiding principles, and you have to check in with yourself on often.
Quickly add to Lee's point around, I mean, I think there's also a matter of perspective that you learn over time, that sometimes setbacks are just having the growth mindset of, you may perceive in the moment that this is a setback, I didn't get the promotion I wanted, or why was I not given this opportunity to work on this project, whatever it is. In hindsight, I think it's important to view these setbacks with a growth mindset of, what did you learn, right? Is it something that you can, and constantly seek feedback and say, okay, what could I have done differently, and what do I need to do to be promoted? And ask the difficult questions of your manager, and be honest with yourself. It's like, okay, these are gaps, I'm gonna work on it, and just and view them as learning experiences rather than setbacks. So I think, you don't always feel that way. I've been in there myself, but I think over the years you've learned that even experiences that may be perceived at the time as very negative can be great learning opportunities.
Yeah.
That's the best advice.
Absolutely. And I would just say, I heard from a minister once, and I love this, Liz. He said, a setback is a setup.
Yeah. For a comeback.
Or a comeback.
Setback is a setup for a comeback.
Yes, yes.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
That's my sermon, and I hope that helps you. Preachers steal from each other all the time. We're gonna pivot here. Please come on up. But I'm going to turn it over to Pam Reeve because I have to catch a plane and go someplace else. But the robust conversation will continue, and thank you for letting me participate in this. Thank you.
So this is really unfair. I get to be Liz for a couple of minutes. Please, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. You all did a great job, and it's fantastic to see such diversity on the experiences you've had in life. Jane, when you started out raising 4 children and not being able to work remotely in daycare and all the stress that created, that was incredible. Jackie, you know, the difference between going to Harvard and going to Roxbury Community College. I'm in the HR solutions space. I landed here, I have no idea, but I'm here now, and with all my life experience, I am so excited to be able to share with so many organizations ways to change your cultures. The HR department does not set the tone for the culture of your corporation. The CEO, the president, and the founders do. And if those are toxic at the top, it goes all the way through to the bottom. So my goal is to develop, so I work for AIM HR Solutions. I started during the pandemic, and I'm so grateful because we are developing a mental health arm for businesses. I want to develop intergenerational conversations and training on that because it's all about respect. It's respect for one another. It's taking away the fear. It's the acknowledgement. I thought it was very interesting because my daughter did her thesis in college on the civil rights movement, how the brothers fought housing, employment, and education discrimination. She would not have known if she didn't write this thesis that in 1973, I lived in Needham and the Medco system was introduced. And I'm 8 years old, and all of a sudden my neighborhood is just infiltrated with police everywhere because they were stoning the superintendent's house because they were bringing the Metro program to Needham. I thought it was amazing. This conversation would never have come up with my daughter writing her thesis we wouldn't have been able to have this conversation if we weren't talking about something in my life experience. So the benefit of age is that we can pass it on to the younger generation. And my goal is that we respect each other, regardless of color, regardless of sex, regardless of anything. Because when I meet somebody, I just see their soul. And I think that that's the basis of how we should live our lives and not judge people. So thank you. You all did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. My name's Jan Goodman. I'm with Cityscapes, and we're celebrating 30 years of business, woman-owned leadership, and our team of directors are mostly women, just saying, but there is hope. I know that our generation, I'm almost 60, I'm proud of it, it's scary. I started when I was 5. There is hope, but there's a lot to change in the older generation. It's hard to change them. So I haven't given up on that. I still try and integrity lead, right? But the children are where it's at. So I have a question for Jackie and, you know, Lee. What do you see in colleges? In fact, we just reached out to Roxbury because I saw one of your brochures at the Brookview Shelter for Women and Children, which we delivered Easter dinners for. And what do you see for programs, classes, anything? Because I know we do a lot of talks on, you know, entrepreneurial, you know, does anybody really want to hear my story? You know, my employees say that. I'm like, no one wants to hear it, but actually they do. You know, I didn't start with anything, a water bucket in my hand, and I have 100 employees. So how did I do that? I have no idea. But it's perseverance, it's grit, anybody can do it. And I never, you know, I did ask to speak on a panel one time, well, what were your obstacles as a woman? entrepreneur, and I didn't really have any per se. I didn't have any money, so I had hard work and a good upbringing with, I was very lucky to have parents who loved me and all that. So my question is there other college classes, high school classes, anything, do you see a trend in more on leadership, entrepreneurship, wellness, all of that, not just math and art, all of that. Do you see in your own college and many others, not just yours?
We have a former college president here.
Yeah,
who's
I want to
still
hear
involved.
from you.
Yeah,
I
think you see all of that. And what we're learning is faculty should be facilitators of learning. They are not the repository of knowledge. So the role of teaching in colleges and universities is changing. Because of that little thing that we all carry, if you just want facts and figures, you can get that. But what a college education should provide you is an opportunity for you yourself to be a learner and to grow, and the opportunity to reflect. We just heard Ruth Simmons last week at Harvard, because Harvard admitted publicly for the first time its role in slavery. And they had a conversation about it, to your point about reparations. And Ruth has a story like you, and I'm going to quickly say this, but she talked about the role of her coming from a small town in Texas to Harvard to study French. And her father said the same thing your father said. Her family said, "What the hell are you studying French for, a black woman from Texas?" But and she said, the reason I went to college was to have this opportunity to explore myself, to find my passion, to actually, and that's what education should be about. So every single institution of higher education should be providing our students all the opportunities that you talked about.
And mentorship, because I
All of
challenge
that.
everybody in the room to be a mentor to a business owner, a fellow business owner. I met actually a small plant company this weekend. I'm like, I want you to be my competition someday. So how can I help you? So I think it's just, my daughter, I'm very proud of. She's 22. She works for Break Time. It's a nonprofit organization helping young adults experiencing homelessness. She has 4 people that direct report to her, and she's 22. I couldn't be prouder. And I do see a very big, even in my own daughters and what they talk about, it's tough. I cannot believe, we never talked about politics when we were kids. Are you kidding me? Like, there was a lot of hate. You talked about hate in our own little community of Pembroke. It was kind of scary, but yet there was a very small amount of the younger generation that were the haters. Most of them were coming to, stand up for what was right. So there is good news about the younger generation as far as my perspective from what I see, because they understand it. It's just getting the truth from social media.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to remind everyone that one of the hallmarks of a TCI event is that we do end on time. And I'm going to ask folks just to ask your questions. I mean, the discussion is great. I wish we could be here another 2 hours because the conversation is phenomenal. It's what we asked for, Elizabeth, is to have a conversation. But I do want to be respectful of people's time. So please ask your question of the panel.
Very quick one. And it's, how are you feeding yourselves? So what podcasts, what books are you reading that are helping you to feed yourself as leaders?
Can I answer this? Because this is very important. 2 things. One is there's no substitute for authenticity. So in my view, the great leaders are authentic, and it comes through. And then there's another quality about leadership that's not discussed much, and I think it's about being vulnerable. I think, great leaders are vulnerable. Maybe other great leaders who are not, but I think that vulnerability is an important aspect of being a leader. And I try to, in my own leadership role at Emerson and here and elsewhere, is to be authentic and to speak my authenticity. So I would encourage you, and that's a scary thing to do, but I would encourage you as you move into a leadership role to always remember to be authentic and true to yourself, and be brave enough to expose who you are as a person, because you are a person, not just president or CEO. Expose that to the people that you work with.
I love your question about what are you reading, and I always encourage people to be reading something. It could either be professional, you know, I ask people, what do you have by your bedside? For me, I have a lot of inspiration. I love historical novels. I love, you know, the leadership books. So it almost doesn't matter to me as long as you're reading, as long as you're finding your ways of inspiration, poetry. But I think it's always important to have something beside you.
I've started rereading books that I read 20 years ago, and I think it's really interesting where you are in your life and how the same book has a whole different meaning. So I found that to be really helpful. I think the other part for me is engaging with the physicians that I work for and being part of their community so that, and for me it's very simple, like I still practice medicine. And I find that the most meaningful conversations that I have with the doctors that I serve is at the time that I'm unequal, like that I'm actually there taking care of patients with them. And I find that very helpful in guiding the work that I need to move forward as I serve that community. So I'd encourage you to be part of the group that you serve as a way to really engage in bidirectional communication.
Great advice.
Yeah, and I would agree with what was said. It's nice to read things. You know, I'm a tax partner by background, so that's, you know, narrow, obviously, tax, but my interests are broader than that. So I like to read books that help remind me of all the issues that are out there. The one I'm reading right now is We Are All Whalers by Michael Moore, and it's about the plight of the North Atlantic right whales, which is a passion of mine. Again, nothing to do with tax, but it goes to the climate change, everything, so it's good.
Hey, and once you become a CEO, set up a book club. I'm serious, for you and everybody that works here.
I always have a fiction and nonfiction by my bedside table, and I kind of go back and forth between the two books. I'm reading a book called The Conversation by Robert Livingston. He's a Harvard professor that it talks about how do you stamp out racism in a workplace, which is fascinating. And the other book I'm reading is called Einstein's Dreams, and it's fiction and it's very interesting. I would say I just got started, so yeah.
And this will be our last question from the audience.
Hi everyone, my name is Wilmaris from Accenture, and I'm actually the Hispanic group lead. And my question for you guys today is, I'm very passionate in, building a community, being a woman liaison, and I do wear that hat every day. But something that I have found really challenging is how to keep that hat with clients, meetings, and conversations. I would like to get your thoughts on how to navigate that, keeping that hat with the client without overstepping boundaries. Because I do see myself in, a bunch of meetings in technology, and I am the only lady on the call, for example. It can be intimidating, but I do want to keep that community and brush off our clients on the values that I have learned. So what are your thoughts on how to navigate that, that conversation with the clients for them to have an understanding that it is necessary to have culture, to have women representation, no matter the industry or practice, because they did not come for us for a diversity and inclusion efforts. There's another practice for that, but instead in for example, implementation of a big technology. How would you navigate, and what are your thoughts on that?
One of the things that it took me a long time to figure this out, and once I did think, my career started to progress better, is I was always trying to be like somebody else. And so back in the day, I was the only woman in the room, most 99% of the time, and the larger meetings. And so people talk about sports, they talk about golf, all these things I didn't do, and I would try. And then I just remember one day, I'm like, I'm done. I'm going to be myself. I'm going to bring my, to the point, raised authentic self to the table. And when someone talks about sports and I don't understand, I'm going to say it. And I'm going to say, I don't understand that. And then I became part of the conversation, and things went so much better at that point because it allowed for that balance that I think you're talking about to occur at the table. Just being your authentic self and having people appreciate what you bring, what they bring to the table, to kind of get that culture going.
Yeah, I would echo the same, sentiments. I don't think I've ever tried. I think part of it is being from a different culture and a different language. So I find that even though I've lived in this country for most of my life, there are still times where like somebody will say a joke and I just don't get the punchline. Mm-hmm. So I'll ask, you know what I mean? Or like somebody will say, I'll give you an example. When I first took the job of Chief Medical Officer, there's a lot of acronyms in medical or healthcare administration that I didn't know. I came into that role being 100% clinician, had a clinical background, and had done some research. So I was quickly trying to learn all of these acronyms, and they kept talking about the islands, and I thought it was an acronym, and I finally said, what does ISLAND stand for? And they said, we're talking about Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. And so, I don't try. I think I try to be, because it's not about you, it's about the office that you represent. So for me, it's not about me, it's about the doctors that I'm representing at the table. So if I don't understand something, I ask. If I don't, and then I think authenticity, and people appreciate that. And I think after, like at the second meeting, people will actually not talk about golf anymore because they know that you don't understand the golfing language, and certainly didn't go and learn how to golf. I just basically say, you know what, I don't golf. And so maybe you can explain to me what like you're talking about, and people explain it and then they move on. And so I think I'd encourage you to just be yourself.
Thank you very much for that.
Gracias.
What a fabulous panel. So first I had the impossible job of being Liz for a couple of minutes, tough enough. And then Elizabeth asked me to summarize and wrap up what you just heard. So I don't know if I can really do that. Liz started off with her devotional from this morning saying that we're moving from the unknown, moving from the known to the unknown. So we're going through a process. That's what learning is moving from the known to the unknown. So I would say the last couple of years, everyone in this room, including our esteemed panel, has gotten a PhD because we have spent so much time going from the known to the unknown. We also heard about, optimism, pessimism, and I can remember so keenly our dear friend Madeleine Albright saying that she's an optimist who worries a lot. And I think of myself that way. I think I'm an optorealist, I guess. I hope that I'm grounded in realism, but I'm always optimistic about the future. So I believe no crisis is too good to waste. I think about all the crises that we are facing right now. Inflation, division, inequity, war, it just goes on and on and on, which could be a real downer. And we spent a lot of time today talking about things like kind of suck your soul out. I look at that and say it's an amazing opportunity space. And I think we heard a lot about that too, about how we can make better, do better, rise higher, run faster, and make the world and make our country a better place. So I would say to all of the folks in this room and the people you connect with, because you're all network nodes, young or young at heart. We heard a lot about the futures with the youth. I'd say it's the young and the young at heart, and those of us that try like crazy to stay young in mind and young in spirit. It's not too late for people who are over 50. We can combine experience, as someone said earlier, and energy if we do a multi-generational dance. So we, the ones who've been around a little bit longer, can offer our experiences, our insights for what they're worth, because not every experience is going to be equal, our money, our connections, a word of encouragement, our leadership example, open a door. There's a lot we can do to help people succeed in their chosen issue areas and fields. It doesn't have to be big. We sometimes think we have to be the one that can write the $25 million check in order to really make things change or make a difference. That's not true. You can make a difference if someone needs just another $100 to make it over the hump, or someone just needs you to make that phone call so they can make the connection. Someone really needs to talk to Lee, and his schedule is busy, but maybe for you, he'll talk to that person. You can make a huge difference in that person's life, just making a step that might sound small. And then I heard a lot about dialogue and action. We've been having a dialogue today with a very wonderful, authentic, candid group of leaders. And this room is full of people like that. Keep talking, and not just in our bubble. All of us have family, connections, colleagues, all across the United States and across the world. Maybe not thousands of them, but we have many of them. Let's have a conversation. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can all do our part to make that dialogue happen. And we need to support the dialogues that are happening at TBF too. And then we can all take action as well. With that, Elizabeth, that's how I'd summarize the morning. Thank you all.
Very good.